Welcome to Thursday Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My name is Jessie Ott, the host of this podcast, which is all about beverage innovation. I talk with innovation pioneers from agriculture to glass. Thank you for listening, and be sure to subscribe to be notified of all new episodes. Welcome to Thursday Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My name is Jessie, and I have Maggie here today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. How are you today?
I'm doing well, but I don't think I'm doing quite as good as you. It looks like you've got about 50 bourbon bottles sitting next to you over there.
Yeah,
That
and
looks
this is
pretty
just one
pretty
wall of
amazing.
my office. They're on every
One
wall of my
wall.
office and in my dining room. So yeah, it's quite the fire hazard I'm sitting in right now.
Yeah, so you're the party cove over there.
Yeah, not a lot of partying going on, just a lot of business. Whiskey
Yeah.
is a business just like any other business.
Yeah, it sure is. Good people in it too.
Oh, absolutely.
So where are you calling from today?
Louisville, Kentucky.
Louisville.
Louisville. I have a handy chart on the wall behind me of all the different
Ah,
pronunciations of Louisville. But if you're from here, you say Louisville.
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 Oh, I did it wrong then, didn't I? Louisville.
There are plenty of people who say it that way. So that's why we have the sign. This is
So you just
actually
cringed. You're like,
this is a
oh.
this is a photo of a neon sign that is in our visitor center downtown. So when you actually come to Louisville, you can get your picture taken by this.
That's funny. I like that. I don't think people that aren't from there will ever get it right, or at least I won't.
It's funny because like I went to there are some other Louisvilles in around the United States, and I went to Louisville, Colorado, and I was like, "Hey, I'm trying to find Louisville," and they're like, "What?" And I was like, "Louisville," and they're like, "You mean Louisville?" And I was like, "No."
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, see, it's just Louisville people.
Yep.
Or Kentuckians, I would imagine everybody knows how to say it.
It's iffy. Once you go
Is
outside
it
of the
really?
city, yeah, it's iffy once you go outside of the city. Like you have to actually be from Louisville to know how to say Louisville right.
What do you know the history behind that? If you don't, it's okay. I'm just curious why it's
So the pronunciation or the name, because I know the history behind the name, but the pronunciation is just, I mean, that's a whole other podcast right there.
okay.
So it was named for King Louis. This was part of the French territory for a long time, and so Louisville was founded in like let's see, like 1789, I think. So it's a pretty old city, but it's this
Yeah.
used to be the western frontier of the United States. And or no, I guess it was founded before the country was founded. Um, and so the country was founded in 1776. But I don't remember all
It's
all that
okay.
different
I
stuff.
didn't
But
mean to
yes,
pop that in. I just thought, oh, that's
it was
interesting.
named for King Louis the 16th. You'll see fleur de lis all over. All over our street signs all have fleur de lis on them and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of like the unofficial symbol of the city, or the official symbol of the city, I guess, probably.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Good, rich history.
Oh, definitely. And one of the really interesting things is about our water, which kind of has a lot to do with the reason that bourbon was so successful. So Louisville actually has one of the oldest and most sophisticated water treatment facilities in the United States, because at one time, Louisville was known as the graveyard of the West. So during westward expansion, people would come through Louisville and get typhus or cholera or whatever and die. And so a lot of people decided to get together and start treating the water so that it'd be safer for people to drink. And between that first typhus epidemic and the second typhus epidemic, that's when that took place. And by the time the
Interesting.
second typhus epidemic came around, people in Louisville were much better off than people like out in the rest of the state and the other parts of westward expansion. So even to this day, we
Interesting.
have we're pretty much a leader in water treatment. and people come here to learn how to handle water treatment and things like that. So, and that kind of plays into the bourbon industry because,
Yeah, for sure.
you may have probably heard one of the reasons that Kentucky bourbon is so good is because we have that awesome limestone filtered water.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Very interesting. I didn't know that. So I guess Louisville's just a big old beverage town.
It really is. We also have a Louisville Ale Trail. That's a fairly new thing. I think that just launched maybe a year or two ago, and we have a lot of breweries as well. And historically, we have always had a lot of beverage type stuff. So there was a pretty big German population here.
Okay.
Probably about the mid to late 1800s. And so there were a lot of breweries as a result of that. But also, like when you look at the history of the Kentucky bourbon industry as a whole, the different immigrants that made that, you have everything from, Isaac Wolf Bernheim was an Eastern European Jewish man who immigrated here and ended up running the second largest distillery owning the second largest distillery in Kentucky. Or no, that was Henry Craver, also an Eastern European Jewish man, second largest. Isaac Wolf Bernheim, I think, actually had the largest. But there are people, like from Wales and France and all over, immigrants from everywhere who came here and made their mark on the distilling industry. And even now we're starting to see a lot of history being uncovered of, the African American influence in the
Mm-hmm.
distilled spirits industry.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, that's very interesting. So, do you have, based on obviously you're the bourbon girl, do you have any insight or what is your opinion on the history of the word bourbon and where it came from? So I've heard the
There are a
whole
lot
New
of
Orleans
people.
Bourbon Street thing, and
So that is the predominant theory. So
okay,
a lot of people say, oh, it came from Bourbon County, and that's not entirely true. Bourbon County, we do have a Bourbon County. There is a distillery there now. There certainly were distilleries there pre-prohibition. But like when you put together the available historic information, it just doesn't support that really. And the predominant theory is put out there by my colleague Michael Veech, the bourbon historian. He's the author of Kentucky Bourbon Whiskey and American Heritage, and he actually teaches this class. He just got off of a river cruise. He got home from a river cruise yesterday. He does a bourbon cruise every year
what?
on paddle wheel boats on the river, and he teaches
How
historical
fun!
classes about bourbon. And one of the things that he teaches is the connection between, uh, you know, Kentucky bourbon whiskey, the river, markets like New Orleans. So, at one time, New Orleans was the main export market. And this was,
Right.
before steam power was even available.
Mm-hmm.
And so, a lot of times these barrels of whiskey, and before that, they would be in earthenware jugs. Which is kind of why we transitioned to barrels because the earthenware jugs would often break during the journey. They would be loaded on flatboats and they would go down the Ohio River, down the Mississippi River, and then be unloaded in New Orleans. And those flatboats would be dismantled. So the other kind of fun fact there is New Orleans pre Hurricane Katrina was the largest collection of shotgun houses in the United States. After Katrina, I think it's the second or third because a lot of those unfortunately got wiped out. But that lumber that is still in a lot of those shotgun houses were disassembled flatboats, and that lumber came from Kentucky.
Uh-uh.
So you would take your flatboat. Obviously you couldn't get your flatboat back up the river because it
Right.
didn't have any sort of locomotion. But once you got down there, you sold your whiskey, you sold your boat, and then a lot of times you would buy a horse, ride it back up the Natchez Trace, and that's where Kentucky Thoroughbreds came from.
No way.
So that's the predominant theory, but the idea
Interesting.
there is, people came to request some of that Bourbon Street whiskey. That's really the theory that Michael Veech has has come upon after, you know, his decades and decades of research. And the reason why is, you know, there are a number of factors. I always like to tell people, like, bourbon wasn't like, people weren't sitting around a boardroom table saying, we should make this stuff and we should put it in this barrel and we should call it bourbon. It just didn't
Right.
happen that way. It was out of necessity, because you needed to preserve crops. You needed to have something that could be used for medicine, calories during the winter, you know, to clean cuts and scrapes, to barter for a bucket of nails to build your barn and all that sort of thing. And so, you know, whiskey had a very utilitarian function. And so, like, on the frontier, they would distill it. They would put it clear whiskey into an earthenware jug. That was that. They could trade a jug of whiskey for whatever they needed, you know, from their neighbors. But, you know, when it comes to bourbon becoming bourbon, you know, we don't see the word bourbon used until about the early to mid 1800s. There
Okay.
was a advertisement in a newspaper advertising for bourbon whiskey. Um, and then, you know, the incremental improvements that took place over time were things like, okay, the earthenware jugs break, so let's put it in a barrel. And then we have, in the Corliss papers, which are at the Filson Historical Society, we have a letter from a grocer to a distiller saying, hey, can you char the inside of that barrel? Because that's what they do with that brandy. And, you know, those people down in New Orleans, they really like that French brandy. So maybe if we char the inside of our barrel, it'll kind of mimic that French brandy characteristic. So you have
That is
all these like
really
incremental
cool.
things that took place that turned it into bourbon. So it's really hard to pinpoint. You know, a lot of people want to say like, oh, Evan Williams, or no, Evan Williams was actually a person. He was the wharf master in Louisville. Elijah Craig, Baptist preacher, father of bourbon. You know, there's this kind of mythology that's built up around him, like, oh, he had a barn fire and it burnt, you know, it charred one side of his staves that were leaning up against the wall. Then he just decided to go ahead and make a barrel out of it. Then he put his whiskey in there, and so he's the father of bourbon. It just didn't, you know, that's a really neat and tidy marketing story. It
Right.
just didn't happen that way. History doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, that's very true. Wow, that's a lot of history in a short amount of time that I had no idea. So I appreciate that. That was really cool.
You bet.
Yeah, because I know that the steamboat had a lot to do with it as well, which I think didn't that increase the bourbon production and down
Oh,
this down to
absolutely. I mean, like, when you have the ability to transport things easier,
yeah,
then you have more of an ability to open up a market. It's easier to get your products moved. It's easier to, you know, when things like that become easier, they naturally are going to expand, right? So, like, if you have to personally load a bunch of jugs of whiskey onto a flatboat and, you know, like, kind of just float down the river for, you know, 2 months or whatever, like,
yeah,
that's going to deter a lot of that trade from taking place. But then when you have a steamship, because the round trip was like 6 months, 8 months, something like that, so it'd be like, you know, 6 8 weeks going down the river to New Orleans, but then it would be, you know, like 4 or 5 6 months getting back to Kentucky. So the
wow,
steamship really cut a lot of time out of that. So I think with the steamship you can get from Kentucky to New Orleans in 10 days or something like that. So, you know, it's really interesting, you know, how all those advances kind of
yeah.
impacted you know, it's just these little shifts that kind of took place throughout history.
And didn't weren't there a lot of accidents with the flatboats, which is why they were pushing towards an alternative because of the
I
different
mean, that
levels of
certainly
the
makes sense.
rivers?
I don't know a whole lot about the history of flatboats. I did actually. There was I went to visit a distillery in Missouri. 3 or 4 weeks ago, the McCormick Distillery, which is also
Mhm.
the Ben Holiday Distillery. I've got some of their whiskey right here.
Ah, nice.
So this is actually a distillery that was founded in 18 I'm gonna forget now, 1864, I think,
Okay.
by a couple of brothers from Kentucky during that westward expansion. So Ben Holiday, you've probably heard his name before. He was the stagecoach king. but he also founded a you know, he and his brother got to Missouri. They got to the Kansas City area. It's in Weston, right outside of Kansas City. And they found, like, there's this river, there's this limestone spring water, and they're like, hey, we know what to do with this, kind of. So they founded that distillery. His brother actually ran it while he went on to found, like, the Pony Express. You've heard of the Pony Express?
Yep.
That was Ben
Okay.
Holiday.
Oh wow.
And so there's actually a really cool steamboat museum there. And the Missouri River, one of the big problems is that it's very muddy and murky. And so you don't have quite that problem with the Ohio River. Um, and you know, it's probably a little bit muddy in the Mississippi River, but like the Missouri River is very muddy. And so even with the steamboats, they would oftentimes get impaled by logs. So there are a lot of like sunken steamboats. And so this museum that I went to in Kansas City was all about the recovery efforts of digging up.
Oh.
There was an earthquake that rerouted the Missouri River at a certain in the 1870s, I think, after like 30 or 40 years after this boat sunk, and they dug up all these artifacts from this steamship wreck.
Hmm.
So it was, and they think there are, you know, literally hundreds more of these steamship wrecks. So certainly, you know, boating was not as straightforward as it is today. So I live right off of the Ohio. I'm about the Ohio River's like a mile that way.
Okay.
So I grew up on the river, and you know, one of the main differences in the modern era versus, you know, pre 1920s, you had a lot of shipping channel dredging from the Army Corps of Engineers in the early 1900s to make those waterways more viable. And so, you know, like one of the challenges for flatboats during the frontier days was the Ohio River like kind of stopped in Louisville, and there was what's called the Falls of the Ohio. And so, in times of the year when the water levels were lower, you really could not get through there because it was like just you know, a stone outcropping. There are lots of fossils in there. There's a park there now. And so what they ended up doing was building a lock and dam system
Yep.
so that boats could get through there. But before that, you would have to completely unload your flatboat, portage around, and then
Oh,
reload it and go on down the river. So, you
oh,
know, it was
sounds
certainly a
painful.
difficult journey. And I'm sure there were more places along these
Yeah.
river channels that were like that. We don't have that today because the Army Corps of Engineers went around and was like, hey, we're going to make this a viable shipping channel. And so, you know, like if you go to the river now in Louisville, you can watch barges go down all day long carrying, you know, they'll carry grain, they'll carry coal, all those
Yeah.
different things, just all day long.
Yeah, we grew up near the Mississippi, so we had locks over there too. So I'm familiar with that system, but I can't
Yeah.
imagine what it was like to have to deal with that before all that was built. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
to
Big
think
I
about
mean,
the
you know, it's amazing
unloading.
to think
Ugh,
about those challenges that, you know, these are things that we just take for granted now. If you
yeah.
want to go somewhere, you just put your boat in the water and go.
Yep. If you can afford to get one
Yeah.
these days, they're so expensive. Everything's expensive.
Oh yeah. Well, you know what boat stands for, right?
I guess not.
A stout another thousand.
There you go. Or a few thousand.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. We didn't have a very big boat, but we could ski and tube and stuff behind. It was really fun.
Yeah, my dad had a sailboat when I was growing up. So everybody else was out there water skiing and we were on a sailboat.
Yeah, sailing is awesome though. That's
Yeah.
really cool. Do you still do it?
Oh no, not for decades.
No. Yeah, me either. We will rent a boat once in a while and take the nephews out here locally, but nothing too often. But it's fun. Something different.
Yeah, it's always nice to be out on the water.
So you say you grew up on the Ohio River. So where are you originally from?
So I've lived in Louisville my whole life, and
Okay.
my mom's side of the family has been in Louisville like pretty much since the founding. My mom's family from Louisville, many generations. And then my mom's dad's side of the family was from Eastern Kentucky, Harlan. So
Okay.
I was born and raised in Louisville.
Okay, nice. It's a great town. I've been there once or twice. We've done a bourbon trail with my old job in the past, and I really want to get out there again and do it with some friends.
Yeah, it's really fun. And the nice thing now, so like when I first started doing this, there were no distilleries in Louisville that were operating. And so since I started doing this, there are, I have to like count it up in my head in a map. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight. I think there are eight, like within a
Oh wow.
10 block stretch, which is pretty amazing. And they've done some really, I think it's actually 10 now. Bob Dylan actually just is opening a satellite tasting experience in downtown Louisville, and is
That's cool.
opening a distillery out in Kentucky. So it's reached that level of popularity at this
Yep.
point where
The celebrities are coming in.
Bob Dylan's like, yes, I'm going to put my distillery right there, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah,
So
it's
you can
smart.
have an entire like weekend and not see all the distilleries in Louisville.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. Well, I know they're kind of spread out too, because what was the major brands? It was Beam. I was with Beam at the time, and then we had Wild Turkey, and then Heaven Hill.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
so when I started this, there were basically like the big eight distilleries in Kentucky,
hmm
and then there were starting to be a few little craft distilleries here and there. I believe we're up to like 75 or 80 in Kentucky now.
wow.
And then, when I started doing this, it was basically like a cluster in Kentucky, two distilleries in Tennessee, one distillery in Indiana, and then of course this one place out in Missouri. And that was like basically, there's one distillery out in California that opened up like 30 years ago. So like there were maybe 40, 50 distilleries 15 years ago, and now there are 3,400 in the United States.
Wow.
The landscape
Wow,
has
I didn't know that
really
there was that many.
changed.
Yeah, a lot of those I bet are in Texas too. Not a lot, not majority of those, but a lot of them.
There are a
There's a lot
ton
of
of distilleries in Texas. Texas and Colorado are two of the places
yeah,
that I'm paying the most attention to right now,
that
because
makes
they've
sense.
gotten to that level where they're starting to realize, hey, we need to work together to get people to come here. And that's, when those distilleries start forming those associations and working together for their mutual benefit, that's really when you have something special.
Right, and that's what happened in Kentucky too, because
Oh yeah.
I've met Bill Samuels Jr.
Hmm.
and Jimmy, and they all held hands, and bourbon wasn't always a big thing, and
Yep.
so when bourbon wasn't selling, they weren't. It was tough,
Yeah.
but they all got together. They're all friends. Working with Jimmy and with Fred No, meeting Fred No, and how basically Jimmy's Fred's like father figure now.
Yeah.
They're that close.
Yep.
Like it's a really
It's
cool
touching.
association. Yeah, it really is.
It's touching, but there's also like a lot of really interesting history that I'm just starting to kind of get into. And
Ooh,
so,
what's
like
that?
this goes back to, like the mid 1800s, where everybody was like, "Hey, why don't we all agree to not produce too much so we don't flood the market?" And then like one person's like, screw you, I'm going to do whatever I want, and floods the market and like tanks everything for everybody. So like it's kind of this cycle that keeps happening, where it's like, somebody comes in and they're like going to take advantage of this popularity, and then they end up screwing it up for everybody. And it's just this cycle that has happened over and over and over
Hmm.
again. It's really interesting to dig into that history.
Yep. Ego. It just it's always there.
Yep.
I'm gonna be better. Yeah, interesting. So, how did you get into bourbon? Like, did your parents or did your grandparents or something? that was it always part of your life, or is
Not
this
really.
something that you
Nope.
discovered on your own?
Nope. Just discovered it on my own. I was a stay-at-home mom when my kids were little, and I needed to get out of the house and go to a place where there were no children. And so I thought getting a job at the liquor store would be a good way to do that. So I walked up to the liquor store in my neighborhood and I got a job, and I worked 3 nights a week. My husband would come home from work and I would walk out the door and I would go work my shift, come home at like 10:30 at night, and then do the mom thing during the day, and then liquor store at night. So, that was, really a good opportunity for me that I didn't realize quite what a good opportunity that was at the time. I originally thought that I was
Right.
going to learn about wine because I had spent, basically a decade in food service. And I thought, if I'm going to continue that when it's time to go back to work for real, quote unquote, um,
Uh-huh.
I should probably have some more marketable skills. So I'm going to learn about wine. Quickly discovered that wine people were not my people. They're a little pinkies in the air for me. So I've always been really into the farm to table movement. Like I grew up in a family where we had a huge vegetable garden every year. After
Oh,
my
I love
parents'
that.
divorce, I moved in with my dad on his farm, and he had chickens and ducks, and eventually, after I moved out, he had goats and hogs and cattle and all kinds of different stuff.
I love that.
And so, like I was always into the farm to table movement, and I always had a big garden when my kids were little. Like, number one, I was poor and I needed the food. But number two, like,
Right.
that was a skill set that I had, right? And
Yeah.
so I started to I remember like standing at the cash register one day, kind of staring at the bourbon aisle. And I was like, you know what? They make that stuff here. Like that's made just right down the street. It really doesn't get any more locavore than that. And so
Right.
I should
It's
probably
true.
learn about that stuff. So I started to kind of pay more attention to it. And this was, 13 years ago was when I started this. And back then, the bourbon boom was really just kind of percolating. And so master distillers would come in and do tastings and bottle signings. Nobody knew who they were. Nobody cared.
Mm,
This was kind of like what prompted the bourbon boom to take off, because these guys got out there and they just spent so much
yeah.
time face to
Roll their
face
sleeves
talking
up.
to consumers. Like, hey, if I can get you to taste this, then maybe you'll like it. Maybe you'll understand the craftsmanship that goes into this. And so, probably Chris Morris from Woodford Reserve made me my first mint julep. There in the liquor store one year. And so I got to meet a whole bunch of master distillers and learn a little bit. And it wasn't something where I was like intentionally like, I'm gonna learn, I'm gonna talk to these guys. It was just kind of like organic. Like, they're
Right.
here, I'm gonna talk to them. And so then one week during Derby week, Jim Rutledge was in my store back when he was still with Four Roses. And this was about 10 years ago. And
Okay.
so I don't know if you ever heard of the Kentucky Derby, kind of a big deal.
Yep.
Um,
It's a little
it,
bit of a big deal.
Everything is pandemonium during the entire 3 weeks leading up to the Kentucky Derby. Everything is
I bet.
pandemonium, even the liquor store. And so I was standing at the cash register, and every time I would try to go talk to Jim Rutledge, a whole horde of people would come in, and I'd have to go right back to the cash register. And it was like that. He was there like 3 hours, I think, and it was like that the whole time. And then he was packing up to leave, and I had to go on break. So I went to the break room, and I was sitting there eating my sad little peanut butter sandwich. And the next thing I knew, Jim came through the door with bottles in one hand, cups in the other hand. He's like, "You didn't get to do my tasting." And he sat down with me. He taught me like the history of Four Roses, the 10 different recipes, which recipes were in which bottle, proper bourbon tasting technique. And it was just this light bulb moment. I was like, this is amazing. I have to tell the
That
whole
is
world
really
about
cool.
this. And so I quit my
Yes.
job and started writing about whiskey.
That is really cool. So you already had the degrees in what,
English and philosophy.
yeah, English and philosophy. So you're kind of already going towards that direction.
Well, so like, and so this was, so 10 years ago, I had already been out of college for a while, and I had done some different things. When I was in college, I wanted to be a writer, and I worked on the newspaper staff intermittently, and just like couldn't make it work. I I'm a first generation college graduate on my dad's side of the family. And so, like I had to work full time and go to school full time. So I didn't really have a
Mm-hmm.
whole lot of spare time for stuff like that. But I still wanted to be a writer. And then I had, at least one professor, and I think it was actually two or three, who were like, don't be a writer. You'll never make any money. And they were right. And so, like, I tried literally everything else, and just didn't connect with any. Like, I can do anything. Nothing is beneath me. I've done it all. um but I just wasn't connecting. I just kind of felt like I was
Yeah.
spinning my wheels always. And I just wanted more than anything to be a travel writer, of all things.
Yes.
And because I love getting out there, meeting people, having new experiences and all that kind of stuff. And so, like, ultimately, like, what I tell people is, like, it's a compulsion. Like, it's a character flaw that I'm a writer. Because if I could
Why?
choose something, I would choose something that paid a living wage. But, like, I can't not be a writer, so I may as well make a little bit of money at it, right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so that's kind of how that came about. But it was kind of interesting. Um, you know, I think it was probably about 2 or 3 years ago. I was kind of like sitting there reflecting about my life and the journey that I was on and everything. And I kind of had this realization that I accidentally became a travel writer just for whiskey. And so, that was kind of a fun realization to have,
Yeah, it is.
because, I was like, oh, hey, I had this dream that I did. Like, I had no inkling whatsoever of how people became writers. And I didn't have anybody that I could talk to. I didn't see anybody who was on this path who I could, emulate. I just
Mhm.
literally had to go figure it out on my own
Figure it out.
eventually.
Yeah. So how did you do it? Like, what was your
Well, I
first
mean,
step?
so I had been writing for a local mom blog here called Louisville Family Fun. I'm still writing for them. Um, and so, like, that was like kind of my, I write about things that I do with my kids. And I'd done a little bit of travel writing for them as well. Um, but there was another mom there who was also a writer, and she was writing for Louisville.com. She's a librarian. And so she was writing about, uh, library things. And I said, hey, I see Louisville.com's hiring, and I see that you're, writing for them. Like, who do I need to talk to here? And so it was really kind of serendipitous that I got in at the time that I did, with the editor that I did and everything, because they were really trying to increase their digital footprint. And
Mhm.
the deal was, write about whatever you want under this beat. We're not going to pay you
Really?
very much, but I was making, like, I think I was making $4 to $8 per article back then, I think.
Oh my gosh.
And they were just like, do whatever you want as long as it falls under this beat. So I was like, okay, one of these is food and dining, and I'm just going to write about bourbon. So, like, I didn't tell them that I was just going to write about bourbon, but I was like, food and dining, surely bourbon falls under this. And so I just kind of started writing about bourbon all the time, and they're like, oh, hey, you're really good at that. Keep doing it. So I ended up doing
Nice.
that for like 2 years. And it didn't pay very much. I had a whole other job on top of that to support my writing habit.
Right. So were you out meeting all the master distillers and
Absolutely.
going and visiting all the distilleries and getting connected and
Absolutely. Like, basically anything anybody invited me to, I went. Basically, like, any opportunity I had, I took it. I was looking for opportunity, I was out there, and people, came to know my work, and came to trust my work. And so that made it a lot easier. And then I started writing for the Whiskey Wash, and then I started writing for the Alcohol Professor. I'm still writing for the Alcohol Professor. And then my colleague, Fred Minnick, um, said, hey, do you want to come write with me at Whiskey Magazine? I said, absolutely.
yeah.
And so I've been with Whiskey Magazine for about 6 or 7 years now. And
Okay.
about 4 or 5 years ago, we launched American Whiskey Magazine, and I've been with them from the beginning. So I'm currently the content editor of American Whiskey Magazine. I contribute to Whiskey Magazine. I contribute to Relish and Whiskey magazine, which is behind me on the wall here. I just had my first opportunity to contribute to Imbibe, which is right over here as well. And
Very cool.
it's been a lot of fun. And then also along the way, I met so Fred Minnick is really somebody who has helped and mentored me a lot in my career.
Nice.
And the other person who has helped and mentored me a lot has been Michael Veech, the bourbon historian. So I met him back during my Louisville.com days as well. I would go to both Fred Minnick's and Michael Veech's events and cover them for Louisville.com. And got to know them a little bit. And so eventually with Michael, I kept saying like, hey, do you have a website? And he'd be like, oh, it's on the list of things to do. And after like months of like, is it moving up on the list or like what's going on here? I was like, can I just build you a website? It'll take me like 2 hours. So
Yeah.
I went over to his house and I had my laptop and I was like, here's your website. And he's like, can you just run it for me? And I was like, okay. So I built and I run his website. I'm still running it today.
Oh, that's cool.
He's been a really great friend and mentor over the years.
That's really cool. That's awesome. It's always nice to have those people that see, the passion and the love that you have for something, and you share that, and you want to help people within the industry. And I think there's a lot of that throughout our industry. I was talking to Nico Martini, which I
Yes.
right, Nico? Yeah, in fact, I think that's how we connected on LinkedIn. Your name popped up, and I was like, yes, I would love to interview her. It was so cool.
Nico's
Yeah, so
hilarious. He tells people I'm his boss, which like I'm not his boss at all, but I'm just like, yes, I'm totally Nico's boss.
yes, I'm totally your boss because you write for me.
Yeah, exactly. You're working for me, buddy.
Yeah, he's funny. My friends have known him for a long time, and we didn't even get through half of his stuff, but um, yeah, he was a very interesting person. I can't wait to meet him in person.
He's a
But he
fun
seems to
guy.
know a lot of people.
He's a really fun guy.
Yeah, I look forward to it. So, do you have any other mentors that you want to mention throughout your?
Really, like there have been so many people who have helped me along this path. A lot of times, so being a woman in any industry has some pretty
Right.
unique challenges. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
things that I think really leaves an impression on me is when people go out of their way to, kind of support women who are clearly not being supported, or just to say like, hey, I think this person's work is really great. And there have been a number of those people throughout the years who have either given me good advice or said kind words about me when I wasn't there, that have made a difference in my life. And
Difference, yeah.
Lou Bryson, Chuck Cowdery, there are just so many people who have really when somebody Kyle Schwartz is another one. He is probably one of my biggest cheerleaders right now.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's really great to have, because like sometimes I'll just kind of be down in the, like working as hard as I do and making as little money as I do, it gets very discouraging sometimes, even though like I'm doing something that's really fun and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, this is a lot of work
Important.
for not a lot of money. It's very discouraging. But then every once in a while, I'll have, a colleague who will publicly recognize me for something. And Kyle Schwartz is one of those people who just continues to do that. Like, oh, hey, by the way, I have a lot of respect for Maggie's, journalistic standards and ethos and all that kind of stuff. And
That's great.
Lou Bryson actually mentioned me in his most recent book. Albert Schmid, has been just absolutely fantastic. He mentioned me in his latest book as well, but he also he went a step further and made me a Kentucky Colonel for the work that
Oh,
I've done in
okay.
this industry. So
What does that mean?
so
I've not heard of it.
the Kentucky Colonel program is you're like a special attaché to the governor, and you become a
Okay.
Kentucky Colonel by doing something to materially benefit the lives of Kentuckians. And so, like, there's a
Cool.
charitable aspect of it, but then there's also, like, what are you doing to materially benefit Kentucky. And so, for me, like I travel all over the world and spread the gospel of bourbon.
That's
And,
right.
because like we're in this really special time. When I was growing up, tobacco was really kind of the king, and it was kind of going away, and like coal was also, just has since the 30s has had just so many challenges as far as being able to sustain a positive public image and things like that. And so like when I was growing up, I was watching our main economic drivers kind of shrivel and die. Which by the time I graduated from high school and then eventually college, all of my friends left because there were not careers here. And
Okay.
so, one of the things that makes this so important and so personal to me is because I'm watching these careers come back to Kentucky
Oh, good.
because of the
Yeah.
bourbon industry.
Bourbon. Yeah.
And so, like, one of the reasons that I work so hard, despite, the dozens of dollars I make as a writer, is because I want this to be a place that my children can stay if they choose to. I want those jobs to stay here. And right now, the distilling industry, the Kentucky Distillers Association puts out an economic impact report in conjunction with the University of Kentucky every other year. I think we're due
Okay.
for one this year. But the economic impact of the Kentucky bourbon industry is staggering. There's
Yeah, I bet.
never been an industry like this before. I mean, we do a lot of auto manufacturing and things, a lot of manufacturing in general. But really, right now, the biggest thing that we have going for us is the distilled spirits industry.
Yeah, that's great. It doesn't surprise me. I mean, it's worldwide in a major way
Yep,
now.
and growing more
And
every day.
yep. And just to kind of go back to when I brought up Nico for the same reasons you just explained on how friendly and helpful people can be to each other in the industry. And that's really important, and it makes it what it is, right? That's why
Absolutely.
we love it.
That's one of
And
the things that I love so much about this. Like I I tend to be somebody who has a lot of social anxiety. But what has made it tolerable over the years is no matter where I go, I know people.
yep,
I
that's
can
true.
I can travel. I travel alone a lot. I spend a lot of time on the road. I can go places, and I always know I can always find somebody to have dinner with, or find somebody to have a drink with when I first get there. Like I go to all these festivals and I know like half the people there.
Right.
That makes it really nice,
A
and they're
lot
all really
more fun.
nice, kind, wonderful people. When I went to the New Orleans Bourbon Festival this year, the first night I was there, I saw Marty Duffy, who is a master of Scotch, and is the current North American brand ambassador for Glencairn Crystal.
Okay.
And so I went and sat with him and talked with him. He's like, "Hey, I'm going to dinner with my niece and her husband. You want to join us?" And I was like, "Absolutely." And so,
Yeah.
it's always just really nice, and so I get to meet not only do I get to hang out with these people all over the world, but also I get to, meet their families, and we know each other's kids, we know each other's families and all that kind of stuff. So, it is a really close-knit, kind community. And I can't imagine this happening at like Coca-Cola.
Right.
Coca-Cola and Pepsi are not like,
They're
"Hey,
not
how's
friends.
little Johnny doing?"
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen that way. And I think that's one of the things that's so unique about this industry, because
Mhm.
everybody, like, we have this history that has repeated itself over, like, we know what's coming next if we don't work together.
Yep.
And so I think that that's a really unique thing about the industry.
Yeah, I agree. I see it in bourbon for sure. The other place that I saw it firsthand because I worked for them is with Saint Michelle.
Mm,
Ted Basler.
yeah.
He was always about promoting Washington wines because
Yes.
if there's a Washington wine on a menu, then we all win because we're all trying to help promote, Washington wines. And so it's
Absolutely.
kind of the same camaraderie of people getting together and helping each other out. And I know that there's a lot of the same types of relationships out there that they are in Kentucky, and
Absolutely.
that just makes it warm and fuzzy and makes you smile.
Yeah.
and then it just makes you love it even more,
At the end
you
of the
know,
day,
being in the
if you're
industry.
working in the beverage alcohol space and you're not having a good time, like, you're probably not in the right in the right realm.
You're not in the right industry. Yeah. We work hard, but we play hard too. We have
Absolutely.
fun.
Absolutely.
So I think about this story Fred used to talk about with his dad Booker. You know, he loved his dad, and
Mhm.
his dad was amazing. And you know, Fred says that he was kind of the beginning of the specialty bourbons. You know,
Mhm.
not making it at mass, but making it, you know, the real, you know, like not new, but like different styles of bourbon. And
So,
he would
like,
go,
everybody kind of in the industry had their own niche, right? So single barrel bourbons, that was definitely more Elmer T. Lee over at Buffalo Trace. So you had Blanton's, which was arguably so there's kind of like this little caveat I like to have here. So Blanton's was really the first like commercially produced single barrel bourbon. However, in the beginning of bourbon, all bourbons were single barrels because they did not bottle it; they just sold it by the barrel. And you would go down to the tavern and fill up your jug or whatever. And
interesting.
so, like, as far as like commercially available consumer packaged single barrel whiskeys, that would be Blanton's at Buffalo Trace. The small batch uh, definitely was Booker, and the but when you look at a small batch in Jim Beam scale versus a small batch in some of the craft distilleries now that did
Sure.
not
Yeah.
exist when Booker was around,
Right.
they're still very different animals. So,
Right.
Booker's small batches are, a few hundred barrels maybe. Whereas, a small batch at a craft distillery might be 5 or 10 or 20
Right.
or something like that. So there the it has changed dramatically over the last 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, and this is, I'm talking early 90s is what he
Yeah.
was saying,
And
because he
so
would
in the
travel the
early
world.
90s, yes, he was really
Yeah,
and Booker, interestingly, Booker never wanted to do single barrels because he felt that you really had to have the ability to blend multiple barrels together. We
blended.
call it batching in Kentucky because blending has traditionally been a dirty word. But like
Oh,
you would have to but Booker always felt that you would have to batch together multiple barrels just to get like kind of consistency and a better quality product. But now, today Beam absolutely makes single barrel products.
mhm.
So it's changed so much since we lost Booker.
Yeah, I wish I could have met him, because he just speaks so highly of him, and
Yeah,
he says his son is like his dad, so that's really exciting. I'd love to meet him and talk to him.
they call him
But
Little Book.
it's
He's
he's
actually such a fun guy, and one of the most exciting projects that has come out, and I don't think I have a bottle of it here. I'd show you. Jim Beam just came out with their first American single malt, and that was all
I heard.
Freddie. So I think it's really interesting the direction that he's taking. He's a very creative person, and he's such a nice guy. Like his dad, I love, but like I just kind of freeze up around Fred. No,
You
but
do?
Freddie is such a like
He's
just
funny.
he is. He's Fred No is hilarious. Love him. Will take every
Oh, man.
opportunity that I can to, you know, be in his presence. But then
Yeah.
like if I'm 5 feet from him, I'm just a statue.
Yeah.
But Freddie is
Just
like
ask
such
him.
an amazing, like warm, kind, humble person. And he's very creative. I really like the direction that he's going with a lot
Yeah,
of
it's
the
pretty
experiments that
exciting.
he's doing.
He would be perfect for the podcast because I know he's doing a lot of cool innovation.
Oh yeah,
So
absolutely.
maybe I can get him on sometime
Definitely.
and meet him. I've heard him on other podcasts before, so hopefully he'll be open
Oh
to
yeah,
it.
absolutely. I mean, well, so I know that he's been on, I can't remember the name, Bourbon Lens, I think is Jake Llewellyn's podcast. And I think that Jake and Freddie used to play football together, and that's kind of
Oh,
the
okay.
connection
Well, that makes sense.
there.
Yeah.
But yeah, he definitely is available for that stuff from time to time.
Cool. Maybe I'll get to snatch him one of these
Yeah,
days.
definitely. You should reach out and see what you can find.
Yeah, I tried Instagram, but I don't know, how often
You have to go
they check
through
that,
the
but
PR people.
the
Most
PR
of
people?
those
Oh, okay.
most of those guys, it used to be back in Booker's day and back in Fred's day, you could approach them directly. And there
Yeah,
were a lot of master distillers that I could just call up and be like, hey, I have a question about XYZ, and they'd be like, yeah, sure, it's this, and that would be it. But now it's like everything is so structured that they won't
structured.
even
Yeah,
talk
and
to you
it
if you
makes
don't go through
sense.
their PR.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I get that.
Yeah.
They're busy people. Um, so what I was gonna ask you, in thinking about Fred and how he said Booker traveled the world, as early as in early '90s, mid '90s. As the a bourbon girl, does any of the master distillers ever contact you and say, "Hey, we're going on a trip. Let's take you around and
Gosh, I
meet all
wish
these
they
different
would.
consumers"?
No.
There, you got to work that girl. You got to get that angle.
I mean, I can't well, so like I definitely have been invited to distilleries. And but that's really my main focus is I write
Yeah,
about it. I write mostly about consumer experiences. And so, I'll write about whiskey festivals. I'll write about, going and visiting distilleries. I'll write about, I do a lot of book reviews and things like that. I'm not really covering the industry. And so, like, I would have to really think about how I would angle that so that that would be something where I would be of value to them. And really, uh, I definitely get invited to like things that don't have anything to do with distilleries, and I pretty much just say I don't know what to do with this, so I'm going to decline. I got
yeah.
invited to a Denver Broncos game one time because a distillery out there was sponsoring them, and I was like, number one, a football game is totally wasted on me. There are so many people who would get so much more enjoyment out of that. And number two, like, this is not something that a consumer can buy a ticket to. So I don't know like what I would be writing about really. Other than like, hey,
Gotcha.
be jealous of me because I got to go to a football game. So like
Right.
I'm very selective about the stories that I do because I feel like it has to I have to be able to make the case that it makes an impact to a consumer.
Yeah. Well, I just would imagine there's quite a few consumer facing events that they do, and then some of
Usually
the
the event will invite me.
tastings and
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
like I do go to a lot of whiskey festivals, and I'll
Yeah.
teach classes and I'll host panels and things like that. I'm not. It's the kind of thing where if somebody's like, "Oh, hey, tag along with us," I'd be like, "Yeah, I mean, if I can't really make any money doing this, I don't really see a point in doing it." Because like it is a lot of fun, but this is not my hobby. Like this is my profession.
Right. Yeah. No, I get that. That's cool. What do you think are the main pain points for the bourbon industry, or do you see any from your point of
There are
view?
a lot of them right now. I mean, so one of the biggest ones, so two of the biggest pain points right now are barrels and glass. And
Yeah.
so
Shortages?
the war in Ukraine actually had a major impact in the availability of glass bottles in the United States. One of the biggest glass bottle producers is in Ukraine. And then the other thing is the issues surrounding oak. So, this is something that distillers are actively working together to address this. And you have, for the last, 10 plus years, you've had people doing things where, like, if you buy a bottle of Angel's Envy in April, we'll plant an oak tree. So Angel's Envy has been doing that for 10 years. Then you have like the Forest Foundation, which is partnered with the U.S. Department of Forestry, I think, and also like different distillers associations to better manage and be better stewards of the oak that's available. Now, there's a new challenge. I don't know if you've heard anything about the emerald ash borer.
No.
So, the emerald ash borer became a problem about 15, 20 years ago, where it was killing ash trees. And at this
Mm.
point, ash trees in the United States are effectively extinct, I believe. And
We
the
we
main
had that
problem,
problem in Iowa and Wisconsin too.
yeah,
There's just trees that are just gone. They're
yep.
just wiped out.
And so
They're
the
dead.
main issue there is now the emerald ash borer has eaten through all of its food and is running out of things to eat because they've effectively wiped their favorite food off of the planet. And now they're starting to go after the oak, which is
Uh-oh.
terrifying.
That
So,
is terrifying.
really, there are a lot of people doing a lot of work toward better management and stewardship of forests and biodiversity and things like that. But right now, like, it's very difficult to get barrels, and it's going to become more difficult as the oak availability becomes more of a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you would substitute something like that or, synthesize or
Well, and really, it's there are a lot of people who are talking about rolling back one of the standards of identity, that it has to be a new barrel. Because currently a lot of the distilleries will sell their beer after they dump the bourbon out. They'll either use it for a different type of whiskey, or they'll sell them on the open market. So, like, a lot of Scotch is aged in ex bourbon barrels. A lot of Canadian whiskey is aged in ex bourbon barrels. Tequila, maple syrup, like all these different things
Mhm.
make use. Tabasco sauce is actually made in
Really?
used bourbon
That's
barrels,
cool.
which is really interesting. So
That is very interesting.
there is definitely a market for used barrels, but there are a lot of people saying, maybe we don't actually have to have a new barrel every time. Maybe we can, work out a compromise where it can be a portion of used barrels, because a lot of people don't realize this. The standard of it being only a new barrel came from the WPA. Are you familiar with the WPA?
No, I'm
So
not.
this was the program that put people to work during the Great Depression and after the Great Depression, sponsored by the federal government, where they were looking for different, industries. So when you go to a lot of the national parks, a lot of the buildings there were built during the WPA years. A lot of the
Hmm.
trails were built during the WPA years. And so this was an attempt to put more people to work. And so they made this one of the standards of identity, was that you had to use a brand new barrel because that would keep coopers in jobs. And
Right.
so, like, historically, most bourbon, before the industrial period, would have been just sold in the barrel and you didn't expect to get that back. That was kind of one of the justifications of it. But when you're talking about that brief period of really the industrialization in the 1880s, 1890s up until Prohibition, and even a little bit after, I think, when producers would dump a barrel, they could absolutely reuse it. And a lot of times they did, because barrels are very expensive.
They are. Yeah.
So there is historical precedent for having reuse barrels in bourbon. It's not super common. It wasn't super common even when it was allowable, but it still happened. So that's one of the things that people are starting to kind of murmur about is, what if we undo this until we can get this oak thing under control?
Yeah, I think they're gonna have to. They're
It's
gonna have
hard
to
to
do
say. I mean,
something.
right now, I think that with all the steps that they're taking, they're telling me that, things are should be fine for, the next 20, 30 years. Um, and that's really why they're putting so much emphasis on addressing it now, because you can't just
No.
plant an oak tree and harvest it tomorrow.
No.
So it's a
Not at all.
challenge. It's a big challenge.
Do you see any trends or anything new coming out of Kentucky or in the bourbon industry?
There are lots of trends. I mean, there are always new things popping up. When I first started doing this, it was, everything was basically, the same standard recipe, bottled the same way, and if everybody had their own, footprint, because obviously if you do the same process in different places, it's going to be a little bit different. Um, but then Angel's Envy, Lincoln Henderson was the father of the Woodford Reserve brand. He's the one who really kind of brought that whole site back to life, along with Stephen Thompson and Dave Shurrock. And so Steve and Lincoln are unfortunately no longer with us. But one of the things that Lincoln did after he retired from Woodford Reserve was started Angel's Envy with his grandson, or his son and his grandsons. And one of the things that really set him apart was he started aging or finishing bourbon in wine barrels. And that was unheard of at the time. And
Yep.
there were a lot of people who felt that that no longer met the definition of bourbon because it had something added to it. And there are still people who will debate on that topic, but really, we're seeing so many barrel finishes now and different combinations of barrel finishes. And one of the really interesting things, I wonder, I don't see any of it up here right now. There are barrel craft spirits, which is barrel with two L's. They've been doing a lot of different combinations. Like, they'll take this portion of barrels and finish it in this type of thing and this portion, and then they'll kind of batch it all together. And they put so much detail on those labels, which I love to see. I feel like the more information you give consumers, the better. And they'll say, it was this that was distilled here, that was aged this long, that was finished in this, and this that was distilled here, that was aged this long and finished in this. And they'll have all of that stuff on that label. And it makes a very complex and complicated product, but they have a cult following. Another one of them is Broken Barrel, which is based in, their production is in Kentucky, but they're headquartered in California. And so basically what they do is they do like a stave finish recipe where they like cut staves into different proportions and put them in the barrel. And that's kind of a play on the research that Maker's Mark had been doing, where they came up with their
Private
all their
barrel.
different private select and their wood finishing
Select,
series
yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. So that's, finishes and staves and all that kind of stuff is, all really big right now. One of the things that I'm following the most closely is the experimentation with pedigreed grains and heirloom grains.
Oh, what's that?
So basically, all Kentucky bourbon is made with Yellow Dent number 2 corn. It's just whatever the farmers all grow, whatever is available commercially on the market. And, you can buy it from here, you can buy it from there, you can buy it from anywhere. And so a lot of the smaller producers in particular are saying, well, but you know what? Like 150 years ago, this Yellow Dent number 2 wasn't really a thing. It certainly wasn't as widespread as it is. And, all these different farmers had different varietals that were optimized for their microclimates and things like that. And they had completely different flavor profiles. So we see a place like Jeptha Creed, which has built their brand on Bloody Butcher corn, which is a red heirloom varietal of corn.
Interesting.
And then, we look at grains. So now there are whiskeys on the market made with black corn, blue corn, white corn,
Yep.
orange
Alconus
corn, all the different colors of corn you can think of. There's a lot of that going on in Texas, obviously. There's a Mexican whiskey brand that's made with black corn. It's really interesting to watch that. And then on
that's
top of
really
that,
cool.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like it too.
I really geek out about this
Super
stuff.
fun.
And
Yeah.
then, on top of that, we're seeing more people experimenting with different small grains. Small grains are more expensive. They're harder to come by. That's your wheat, your barley, your rye. Triticale. People are doing all kinds of different. There's a whiskey that recently got produced from a perennial wheatgrass. So, it's really interesting, all these different things that are becoming available at a wide enough scale to actually produce whiskey with it. So one of the coolest stories that I did last year, there's a distillery up in Michigan called Mammoth Distilling. And basically what happened was their whiskey maker, Ari Sussman, discovered that rose and rye actually originated in the United States in Michigan at Michigan State University, and he traced the heritage of that, and then tried to get some on the open market, and it really was not available. Simultaneously, over in Pennsylvania, Laura Fields and the Delaware Valley Fields Foundation had been bringing that back for Dick Stoll before he passed away at Stoll and Wolf Distillery, because back when he was the master distiller at Michter's in Pennsylvania, that was the type of rye grain that he used. And so he fortunately lived long enough to see that first run of rose and rye whiskey come off the stills there at Stoll and Wolf. But even though it was really popular in Pennsylvania and it grew in 30 states, it originated in Michigan. And so the folks at Mammoth got a little seed packet from the USDA seed bank and took that to an uninhabited island, South Manitou Island, at Bears Ears National Park, and cultivated that on one of the original farms where it grew 40, 50 years ago. And
Wow, that is
so
super
it's a
cool.
painstaking process going
Yeah,
from an almost extinct grain to having enough to
right.
actually be able to distill it. And I think this year they will have enough to finally distill a small run of rose and rye there.
That is really cool. So what kind of flavor profile is that, do you know?
It's hard to say, right? So I've had some of the distillate from Stoll and Wolf, and it
Mhm.
is a different flavor profile, but it's really hard to kind of pinpoint that, because um, it's unaged at this point, and so you would
Okay.
have to compare it to an unaged rye whiskey that's made with a common rye. And so I'm really interested to see what the stuff looks like once it matures. We just don't know
Yeah.
yet.
Oh, that's
It
exciting.
is.
People that love ryes are gonna love that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, for me, it adds a little spice, and I really like it. Um,
I like really
it's
herbal
fun.
ryes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really, really awesome. I guess it's be mean to ask what your favorite is, so I won't do that.
Oh, you can ask.
Yeah, that's okay. I don't want to put you in that position because I know you love everybody in the industry. So,
Well, my
um,
official line when somebody asks me what my favorite is whatever you're buying.
yep, exactly. But do you have a style? Is rye your favorite, or
Um,
is there?
I really don't have a favorite style. Like I judge a lot of spirits competitions, cocktail competitions. I go to a lot of different distilleries. I'm excited about American single malt, but obviously, like, bourbon has my heart. As
Yeah.
a tried and true Kentucky gal. And I really love rye whiskey. I think that rye whiskey has a lot to do with the resurgence of the cocktail culture,
Yep.
and
Absolutely.
getting us back into decent cocktails instead of the day glow green shelf stable sour mix era, which was just awful. um, so I appreciate, whenever people are like, what's your favorite this or that, I'm like, you know what, like, I really appreciate the hard work and the blood, sweat, and tears that goes
Mhm.
into this. Is not an easy industry to
Mm-mm. Very
come into,
capital
right?
intensive.
Like,
Yeah.
you can't build a distillery and flick a switch and start making a product that you can sell. You build a distillery, and then you make your product, and then you put it in a barrel, and you put it in a warehouse, and you store it for 6 years before you sell it.
Right.
And that's
Yeah.
like, nobody. You don't, like, make a, a Ford truck and put it in a lot for 4 years while it ages. Like,
No.
that's it's kind of crazy, right? So, like,
It
I
is.
think a lot of the people in this industry are a little crazy, a little unconventional, and I think that's why I found my people.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, and it's a community too that you found
Absolutely.
yourself that you loved, and they loved you back, and it just kind of fit into who you are and what you wanted to do. And I think that's super cool. And I love the story you told us about the realization of travel, how it kind of came full circle and on its own without even really, I mean, expecting that. I
Yep.
think, right? So,
Totally by accident.
so do you write about different bourbon trails and like where to stay and like? stuff, anything like that?
So the where to stay piece, like I have visited other states. The only place where I have been invited where they actually took us to multiple distilleries is Virginia. And so I did
Okay.
do a piece about that. I have done articles about, different distillery trails and what's available, because I think that a lot of people don't realize that there is anything else out there other than the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. And there are bourbon trails in Colorado, in Arkansas, I think in they're definitely in Virginia. New York State
Oh,
is a big one. Texas, obviously. I don't know if I said Colorado already. I'm really excited about Colorado. There's some stuff kind of percolating in California. The California distilleries, I've only been to one, and that was
okay.
Blinking Owl. It was really great. They're doing a great job out there. I need to get up into Northern California, because in the Napa region, Napa and Sonoma, there are a ton of distilleries, and a lot of them are doing American single malts, which is just absolutely fabulous.
Interesting. Wow, I didn't know that. That's interesting. I got to get out there.
Yeah.
I really do. I've been out there for work a couple of times, but not just to go and discover, you know, different wines and I didn't know that that was happening out there
Oh
too.
yeah. Well, and I went to a distillery in Portland, Oregon. There are several distilleries out there, but again, I only was able to visit the one on that trip. Washington State, several distilleries there. There's just some really interesting stuff happening all over the country right now.
Yeah, I love it. I think there's enough room for everybody.
Absolutely.
There's enough love, and like you said, look too, from the locals' perspective, that's how you fell in love with bourbon in Kentucky. So you have other people in Texas and Oregon, Washington, California that are gonna want to do the same thing,
Absolutely.
support their local distilleries. Dallas has a lot too, not distilleries, but we have breweries and some wineries and
Oh
whatnot, and
yeah.
so it's always kind of fun to support your local breweries.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, is there anything that we missed or that you want to say to the audience before we sign off?
I mean, I think, obviously I have to say drink responsibly. If you shoot it, you only get to taste it once. That's
That's true. That's a bummer with bourbon.
It really is. Like I was doing a tasting someplace one time, and somebody I knew walked up and was like, "Oh, bourbon, I hate this stuff." And I was just like, "Of course you hate it if that's how you drink it."
You drink it. Yeah. You got to
So
enjoy it.
take your time, learn to enjoy it, stay hydrated, don't do anything
Yeah.
stupid. those are a lot of the things, but really, most people live within a couple hours of a distillery now. So if you think this might be something that you want to start exploring, find out who your local producers are, get to know them, go visit them, learn the process in your own
Yep.
backyard. And then if you want to level up and come to Kentucky, you kind of already have, a lot of people say, "Oh, I like bourbon, but I only care about Kentucky." And I'm like, really, like, as much as I love to hear that, I also want you to know there are a lot of people making really awesome stuff probably also in your backyard.
Right. Well, I know Garrison Brothers in South Texas. I think they spent time with Beam. I mean,
Oh yeah. Well, and a
they're
lot of people
teaching.
do. A lot of people get talent from the
Yeah.
Kentucky industry. Milam and Green there in Texas also. Irene Holmes she worked at Beam, and Heather Green worked at the Flatiron Room in New York. And these are two people in the industry who have amazing talent who are running that. But really, like Iron Root Republic in Denison, Texas, which nobody's ever heard of, they've won best corn whiskey in the world once, and world's best bourbon twice, a
You're
Texas
kidding.
whiskey. So, I
Hmm.
mean, there's a lot of really amazing stuff happening in your own backyard if you're willing to go look for it.
Yeah, I need to get up there.
Absolutely.
It's not that far. Well, I didn't know that. I did not realize that. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
So I do have one bonus question. It's kind of a fun question.
Okay.
But if you were to win the lotto, doesn't matter, million, 10 million, doesn't matter. Would you do anything different, or what would you do differently?
I really don't think I would do anything differently, honestly. I mean, I
I
enjoy what
love
I
that.
do. Obviously, if I'm doing it for dozens of dollars, I would very much enjoy to keep doing it and not have to worry about money.
So you wouldn't open a distillery?
I mean, people ask me all the time, like, would you ever consider working for a distillery? And I've had offers to
Yeah,
come work for distilleries or to, consult and all that kind of stuff.
yeah,
And, I always say if I find the right opportunity, I will. Like
yeah.
I definitely don't want to get myself into a situation where it stops being fun.
Fun. Exactly. I see you more being like a retailer with all the different bourbons and doing more educational pieces and having
I actually
dinners
kind
and
of
that
miss
kind of thing.
working in retail. I miss having regular customers and
I,
having that interaction
mm-hmm.
on a regular
Yeah,
basis. Yeah, I could. That's something to think about.
yeah, 100%. I mean, my two favorite jobs that don't pay, they don't pay. I worked at Total, and I love talking about wine and spirits from all over the world all day long. I just loved it. I lost weight. I dropped like 3 sizes because you're going
'Cause
up
you're
and down on
walking
ladders. You're on your
all the
feet.
time.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. And my other favorite was a bar here, a wine bar called Cork, where they didn't have food. They just had like cheese plates, but they had cards where you just go and get an ounce of this, an ounce of that. I think there was like 25 wines on tap.
Oh, that's very
But
cool.
it's a great experience. But getting home at 2, and then it doesn't work out with the
It's a
other
hard
person
life.
because they're normal business hours, and so it's just gets it's hard. But I love retail. I loved it a lot.
Yeah.
It's fun. It's fun just talking about what you're passionate about.
My feet also hurt thinking about it. So
I know. Same. Absolutely the same. Yeah, for sure. Well, you have been an awesome guest. I love your passion. I hope we can meet soon, and definitely have you back on the podcast
well, if you ever come to
again.
Kentucky, let me know.
Well, the plan is I gotta plan a tour with some friends and just go for like 3 or 4 days
Totally.
and just hit as many places as we can and
Well, let
just
me
have
know
some
if you have any
fun. And
questions when you're planning. I'm happy to help.
oh, that'd be great. Yeah, I appreciate that because I only know what I know, which is the places that the people that I've worked with. So, outside of that, like I haven't been to Heaven Hill. I really want to go see Jimmy and Wild Turkey.
Jimmy
He's
still sits
amazing.
in the visitor center every now and then, but he's getting up there. So get while the
I
getting's
know.
good.
I know. I gotta go. I had the pleasure of working with him
He's
in
such a wonderful man.
Amazing Express. A couple of times I've actually got to work with Jimmy, and I'm telling you, that man is the last person to leave the bar
Yep.
every time. Because we'd be there from 7 to 7, then we go eat and we just hang out.
And
It's the best.
truly one of the kindest, most wonderful people you'll ever meet.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just adore that man. He's so cool. He's such a a hero in a sense, right? Like you
Totally.
just look up to him so much. About I heard his grandson on another podcast, and it's a lot to look up to, right? Being
You
in
should
his
talk
shoes.
to
But
his granddaughter, Joanne Street.
oh,
She
really?
is a hoot
Okay,
and a half.
okay. Joanne Street.
Yep.
Okay, I'll have to find her. What does she work for the company?
She does. She's their national brand ambassador now. But she started
Oh,
off
perfect.
working summers as a tour guide at the distillery.
So she knows where
Absolutely.
everything is. Oh, that's really cool. Thank you for the tip. I'll reach out to her. Alrighty, well, thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
This week's episode was produced by Fedora J Productions.